I don't know about you, but when I'm at home, I spend most of my time wearing either last night's pajamas, a pair of lounge sweatpants, or if I'm feeling particularly fancy, some athleisure. As I'm spending about 99% of my time at home these days, it got me to thinking, what is the Victorian equivalent of at-home loungewear? I had a lot of fun recreating the Victorian walking ensemble meant for outdoor winter wear, and I spent a lot of time staring at beautiful pictures of Victorian evening gowns online, but I am fascinated now a little bit more with what your average person would wear on a day at home, maybe doing some light chores or just kind of relaxing around the house. As a quick heads up, I won't be doing any knitting or sewing or crocheting, any kind of crafting really in this video. I'll just be mostly chatting about the research that I've done on Victorian casual wear at home. So if you're not interested in that, feel free to tune in again next time. And also thank you so much for all the compliments I got on this sweater that I was wearing last time as well. I've spent some time in my breaks between larger projects to finish my own knitting projects, especially now that the weather's turned colder and I need some warmer clothes to wear now that we've already had the first snowfall here. Anyhow, back to Victorian loungewear or at-home wear, I wanted to really start more thoroughly researching this topic, but I am still very much an amateur. This is just done in my own free time using free resources that I could find online, so this is by no means all-encompassing. I just wanted to share what I learned and what I thought was really fascinating, and as always, I find all of your insights and comments super helpful. If you have any other resources or information on Victorian wrappers and loungewear in particular, please do feel free to leave me a note. I love reading them. When doing any kind of research, I always really enjoy looking at primary sources or first-hand accounts from the time, and one of the ones that I turned to first, or I managed to find first, was the book called The Lady's Book of Etiquette and Manual of Politeness, a complete handbook for the use of lady and polite society. This is originally printed in 1860, and I believe it was printed in the United States, and it was reprinted multiple times later on, including in the 1870s, and I believe I have a slightly later edition as well, but I don't have it on me right now, so I can't check for sure. What drew me to this book was that it had an entire chapter on house dress dedicated to what was appropriate to wear around the home. And what I thought was really interesting is that it's split by time of day. So what you could wear in the morning, before breakfast, during breakfast, in the afternoon, and it all depends on the kind of activities that you'll be doing and the people who you'll be seeing. And it seems to me like from this book and a few other sources that the morning time / breakfast time is really the most casual time and where you'd be wearing the least formal wear around the house. So from this book, it says that the most suitable dress for breakfast is a wrapper made to fit the figure loosely, and the material, excepting when the winter weather requires woolen goods, should be of chintz, gingham, brilliant, or muslin. A lady who has children, or one accustomed to perform for herself light household duties, will soon find the advantage of wearing materials that will wash. So this reference to wrappers is being worn to breakfast and maybe for light household duties and receiving unexpected visitors kind of drew me to this concept of a wrapper for the first time, and it kind of made me hone in on exactly what a wrapper is, what it looked like, how it changed through the decades, because this book was written originally in 1860 and I'm personally more interested in casual wear from the 1890s and in what situations it would be appropriate to wear that. Wrappers of the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s are absolutely gorgeous, but like I mentioned, not personally my area of interest, so I'm looking for a little bit further references later on in what women in the 1890s would have also worn under their wrappers, with their wrappers, to what occasions could you wear your wrapper, and when would it be appropriate to wear your wrapper exactly. Now that book did mention that if you have children or are accustomed to doing light household duties, then you should make the dress out of materials that would wash. And it seems to me from some of the other primary sources that I found that wrappers could be made from varying materials, and that seems to be highly dependent on your position in society. So there's actually a court case from the 1880s. I think it lasted for 6 years. It started in the early 1880s and there's still documentation from the late 1880s about two people who were separating, and the woman was trying to get her possessions back because he had not given up all of her belongings, and included in that were a lot of her clothes and dresses, including very expensive silk wrappers, and she could list down to the yardage exactly what the dresses were made with and trimmed with, and I would assume that if you're wearing a wrapper made out of expensive silks, you wouldn't necessarily be performing light household duties in them. When I was trying to look up more information about Victorian wrappers, what came up quite often were Victorian tea gowns, and sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, but from what I could tell, the tea gown is meant to be worn in the afternoon without a corset. This came about, from what I know, I didn't do a lot of looking into tea gowns, in like the late 1870s, 1880s, and they are meant to look almost like you're wearing a dressing gown over kind of like a nightgowns, but they're highly trimmed, made out of very expensive materials. Typically, I think even the House of Worth created a tea gown, and they're meant to be worn, you know, with your closest acquaintances and actually receive visitors in them in the afternoon, versus a wrapper is meant for lounging at home, receiving maybe unexpected visitors, being with your family around breakfast time, and performing your chores or duties for the day. Some other really interesting sources that I found were a few different magazines that publish information on either how to make your own wrapper or what the perfect wardrobe would look like for a small family for the springtime. So it definitely seems like it was a very common article of clothing to have, to make maybe a fresh one for the spring and maybe make a few different style variations, so something that's a little bit more commonly worn around home. I don't know about you, but I love looking at magazines, and I like looking maybe at the articles and advice that are written in magazines, but I don't necessarily live my life as illustrated or depicted by them. So what I was also very, very curious about is, how did the average person wear a wrapper, and what did they think of wearing a wrapper? To what occasions did they wear those wrappers? And not just like the idealized world of what a magazine thinks you should have in your wardrobe, or how you should make the cut of your dress and when you should wear them. And I actually found this really interesting article from the Rural New Yorker. It was published in 1898, and it has an entire section that's called Woman and the Home, and they had a particular article that was dedicated to how women worked in their clothes and what clothes were the best to wear when you are performing your daily household chores and tasks and, you know, going about your day. And what I thought was really interesting is that basically they had women write in to them from the 1890s talking about what they wore and what was most comfortable for them to wear while they were working. And so this is actual women of the time writing about garments that they found most practical to wear around the home doing their daily tasks. And a lot of them came to the similar piece of advice that they would wear one-piece calico wrappers that were easy to wash. They had 2 or 3 different types of them that they could switch out during the week before wash day, and that they also like to wear aprons or oversleeves over the wrappers to make them last longer between washes. They also had very practical pieces of advice, like wrappers should not have trains. Wrappers should be made that when you unbutton it from top to bottom, you can iron it in one piece very quickly, and the fact that a wrapper is in one piece and it's not a separate top and a skirt makes it really easy to put on, and the fact that it buttons in the front also makes it very quick to put on by yourself. Of course, everyone has their own preferences, so there were a few women who also wrote in saying that they really detested wrappers, and they thought that the large piece of fabric was very hard to launder and then to iron, so they actually preferred wearing a separate skirt and waist, and that if you have a separate skirt and waist that you could better vary what you're wearing depending on the seasons, and you can maybe layer it better. So of course everyone always has their own preferences, and what I like to wear to lounge around the house or do my chores in is probably going to be different from what a lot of other people like to wear. So I thought it was also interesting to see what the personal preferences were at the time to wear around your own house. So to me it seems like at this point that I kind of solidified that the wrapper was a kind of go-to garment for women to wear around the home. What I wanted to then really kind of understand is, what would you wear underneath? So I found some secondary sources that led to some primary sources that kind of touch upon the subject of what you wore underneath a wrapper. As I mentioned before, the tea gown is actually created to be worn without a corset, but what about the wrapper? I did find an article that mentioned a woman who goes without a corset while wearing a wrapper on a summer day is just very sloppy, and it isn't something that should be done. And there's other articles that say, you know, a woman who wears a sloppy wrapper without a corset is setting a bad example for her family and things like that. So it seems like the etiquette books and the advice books of the time say that you should always wear a corset with a wrapper, but to me it also says that there are plenty of women who wore the wrappers without corsets for them to say to not do that. So I would also think that it's probably a function of, well, probably temperature. Maybe it's too hot and you don't have a corset that is appropriate for the weather, or it just feels a little bit too hot when you're wearing it, so you decide not to wear it. Maybe you're just taking breakfast with your family, and so you don't really need to wear a corset underneath that. And maybe if you're doing farm work or chores, you would want the support of a corset to be worn under the wrapper that you're wearing while you're performing your household duties. Sorry, I keep on saying like household work or household duties because that's what I kept on reading in the articles, but just generally while you're doing your work, you would maybe want to have the support of a corset. Now, why am I so particularly interested in exactly what the underpinnings were for what women were wearing underneath their loungewear is I actually want to recreate this ensemble myself, and I was trying to figure out if it would be normal to wear a corset or not underneath a wrapper. So I'm really excited because my next project that I plan on doing is 1890s loungewear, and I do want your feedback, so I'm going to sketch out what my plan is, and I would love your feedback, especially on the corset versus no corset debate. I do plan on wearing this wrapper kind of as more of like an around the house, relaxing type gown, but I might have to do the dishes in it, I might have to, I don't know, go downstairs and pick up my laundry in it, so actually being able to go outside and do some like light housework would be nice. Okay, so let me show you what I have planned to make my 1890s Victorian lounging ensemble, actually mostly from copies of antique items that I actually currently own. So I will be starting from the inside layers out, beginning with the chemise, drawers, and stockings. I already have some of these garments, but they're meant for outdoor winter wear, so it's a little bit warm to be worn indoors in any season. So I'm going to be making another set of lighter chemise, drawers, and stockings. Like I mentioned before, I'm actually going to be using extant antique pieces that I own as inspiration for a lot of the items that I'll be making as part of this ensemble. For the chemise and drawers, I'll be using a truly Victorian pattern, TV 102, but I also have a set of antique drawers with hand-knit lace that I will be copying and using as trim for both the drawers and the chemise. For the stockings, I will be copying a pair of antique Victorian hand-knit cotton stockings, and I actually hope that I'll be able to release a few more knitting patterns made from these existing pieces to share with you all. Now this next layer is where I need a little bit of feedback from you all, because this is where I'll be deciding whether or not I'm going to be wearing a corset. However, I will also be wearing a petticoat on top of this, and I'll be making myself another pair of slippers that I think are going to be nice and cozy warm. For the corset, I did manage to find something called a morning corset. I couldn't find any primary or secondary resources that talk about this, but it is mentioned as being from 1893 and almost like a wrap supporting corset meant to be worn in the mornings, as far as I can tell from the pattern and the picture. So I think this might be the perfect thing for me to wear. So if anyone has any more information on this morning corset, please do let me know, because I am very, very interested. The petticoat is another item in my collection that is an original Victorian petticoat with hand-knit lace insertion and trim that I want to try to reproduce. And then the slippers, I don't own an extant pair, but going back to my 1890 copy of The Art of Knitting, I want to recreate another pair of slippers from that book. The last layer is actually the wrapper itself, and I plan on wearing an apron on top of it. If you watched my video a few weeks ago on my antique clothing collection, then you'll see the apron that I'm planning on recreating with beautiful hand-knit lace trim. You can kind of see a trend, I think, on all of the reproduction items, including hand-knit lace trims and insertions. And the wrapper itself, I am taking a pattern from the Mantua Maker, and I'm using an extant 1890s wrapper that I unfortunately don't own, with this beautiful red paisley print that I managed to find a reproduction cotton print of, so I think I'll actually be able to get quite close to that extant gown design, although I'll be going slightly smaller on the sleeves. Now, I am not an artist by any means, but I really enjoy practicing my sketching and breaking out some watercolors and trying to practice the watercolor techniques. I find that it ends up looking really beautiful, even if it's not perfect, to kind of give myself a better idea of how I imagine this wrapper and apron to look. Alright, so that is my project plan for making 1890s loungewear, and I will be making between 7 and 8 new pieces, depending on whether or not I decide to make the corset, and that would actually be the first corset that I make, which should be quite interesting. I hope that you all stick around. If you do want to see me work on this project, feel free to subscribe, and I hope that I'll see you again really soon.